Well, I feel overwhelmed with the responsibility. I mean, the world, of course, in a very difficult situation, and especially feel an enormous responsibility to do everything I can to help. And of course, the leadership will belong to member states, but to help as an honest broker, as a convener, a catalyst, with humility, but also with determination, to help make countries come together and overcome their divisions, overcome their differences of interests, and really make progress in the way for peace in our world.
So, what is the first thing you're going to do after you assume office next year? What is the most pressing issue on your agenda?
Well, I think the most pressing issue is peace. Is to do everything we can to address the multiplication of conflicts we are witnessing, because peace is also something essential to limit the growth of these terrible terrorist developments we are witnessing. Unfortunately, all these conflicts, Syria, Iraq, but also Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, Nigeria, Mali, all these conflicts are interlinked, and they are linked with global terrorism. You see fighters coming from all over and going to different of these countries, and you see terrorists coming from there, and also terrorists that are motivated by these conflicts in the countries where they live. And so to end these conflicts is also a way to put an end, or at least to strongly limit these dramatic terrorist developments we have witnessed in the recent past. So this will be my main concern, to work with member states strongly, to convene, to bring people together, to try to address the problems of global peace and global security. And of course, in this context, I have to say the priority is in Syria. Syria is the most dramatic of all the conflicts, and in which the people is suffering more than anywhere else.
To maintain the international peace and security, people always say that the United Nations should act as a whole. But in fact, the United Nations is made up of UN member states with different national interests. So like the question of Syria, world powers divided over this issue. So how will you survive and get your job done?
I think that what the Secretary-General can do is, with his good offices, he's not the leader of the world, he's not the president of the world, is with humility, as you said, but with determination, what he can do is to try to bring together those countries that have an influence in the parties to the conflict, and help make them understand that this is a conflict in which nobody is winning, everybody is losing. And the people is suffering tremendously, but the stability of the region is being put seriously into question. See what happened in Iraq. And this conflict is triggering terrorist activities all over the world. And so I think there is much more to unite all states to stop this war than the eventual benefits that they might think they can obtain in a conflict that will never end and in which everybody will be losing. And I hope to help people understand this, and I hope to cooperate with member states to try to bring them together and working together to try to overcome these terrible difficulties that we have been witnessing in Syria as in other parts of the world.
Now you stand on a larger platform. Is that the opportunity for you to address this issue with great power?
I would say that it was an enormous privilege to be a Commissioner for Refugees, to work 10 years with the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, and to do my best for them to be protected, for them to find a solution for their plight, to rescue lives. I mean, that was a fantastic privilege. But it was also an enormous frustration, because I could not solve their problem. I could only try to assist them, and UNHCR and all the organizations working with us could only minimize their suffering. But we are not solving the problem. The problem is political. The solutions need to be political. And that is where the UN, the Security Council, first of all, is so important, to find political solutions for these problems. And the Secretary-General can be a facilitator. But of course, the Secretary-General cannot replace member states and cannot interfere with the need for the bodies of the UN to really come together and reach consensus on these difficult decisions. I was so happy to see the unity and consensus that prevailed in the Security Council and in the General Assembly when I was selected. I hope this consensus will also create a new dynamic situation to allow for consensus in relation to the serious crisis we are facing in the world.
Thank you. Another issue you have to tackle in the coming years is climate change. So as we all know, the Paris Agreement will enter into force next month. So do you think the Paris Agreement will be another Kyoto Protocol?
I think the Paris Agreement is more than the Kyoto Protocol. First of all, it's universal. And second, all the key countries that are relevant to climate change are now fully engaged. And China has been a very important partner in this development. And I am strongly hoping that what still needs to be done will be possible, and that the level of demand that is necessary to make sure that the temperature will not grow more than 1.5 degrees, that these additional commitments will be made, and countries will fully assume the responsibility to make climate change something that is tamed, that is controlled. Because one thing is terrible on this. If you go to Africa, you see countries that do not contribute much to climate change, but that's where they are suffering so much, the consequences of it. So it's a moral responsibility of us all, and I'm quite optimistic about the capacity of world leaders to really make it happen, to make the Paris Agreement be the starting platform to an effective control of climate change.
So the United Nations member states also have adopted the Sustainable Development Agenda. So some people are criticizing the agenda is too ambitious, it's too far to reach. So as the next UN Secretary General, what would you do to promote the implementation of this agenda?
Well, first of all, it's an ambitious agenda, but the leadership is of member states. And member states can assume voluntarily the targets that they consider the priority in their own situation. What is necessary is to make sure that the UN as a whole works effectively and united and in a convergent way to support member states to do that. And that we don't have a UN in which each agency or each organization is doing its own work without taking into account a common goal, a common objective and a common strategy. And I will commit myself as much as I can to make sure that the UN will be at the service of member states to make the SDGs a success.
I assume this is the first interview you give to a Chinese media after your appointment.
Yes.
So how will you introduce yourself to our Chinese audience?
Well, first of all, I have an enormous admiration for the Chinese culture, the Chinese history, the Chinese contribution to world civilization. In my country, people were still probably living in caves or in trees, and China was already an important civilization with very important contributions to the world civilization. And second, I had the chance in my life to work together with the Chinese authorities. First, as Prime Minister of Portugal, I was in charge of the negotiations from the Portuguese side of the handover of Macau, and this was a very, very successful negotiation, and I was very proud to see that it was possible to leave the administration of Macau with China fully assuming it, and that's to be done so smoothly and so effectively. And I'm very grateful to China for the excellent cooperation we had in that. Then afterwards, as President of the Socialist International, I had the chance to decide in our Congress in São Paulo, it was my proposal, to establish a strategic dialogue with the Chinese Communist Party, and I visit China in that capacity to launch it. And then later, as High Commissioner for Refugees, I had the chance to maintain a very constructive dialogue always with the Chinese authorities. So China is a country that I admire a lot, and China has today a very important role to play in the world. I think the full assumption of Chinese responsibilities will be extremely helpful to address both the problems of peace and security, the problems of sustainable development, and the problems of human rights in the world. So I'm really very hopeful that the cooperation between the UN and China will be a very fruitful one, and that China will be a very important pillar in this multilateral approach to problems that is essential, because all problems are now global, and the only possible answer, effective answer, is a global one.
So how will you seek cooperation with China under
all
the UN?
All possible forms, through dialogue with the Chinese authorities, and through the appeal for the very strong involvement of China in the solution of global problems.
So there is a strong call from all over the world that there should be much more representation of women at the United Nations, especially its senior management group. So will you appoint, as rumors has said, will you appoint a deputy secretary general who is a female?
Yes.
That's your answer.
Yes.
So on other positions, will you consider,
in relation to all other positions, I think we need to move into with an objective of parity at all levels. Of course, that needs a roadmap, needs a time framework, but it is my strong commitment to work in that direction, as it is my strong commitment to make sure that the UN, in everything it does, fully respects gender equality, and that the empowerment and the protection of women in conflict situations and other dramas that we face in the world is our central priority.
People said the United Nations Secretary General is the toughest job in the world. So what is the driving force behind you to get this position?
I was a very lucky man. I had the best education available in my country that my family have provided me. Then we had the revolution, the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, which allowed me to be very strongly engaged in politics since I was very young, and then to have very high responsibilities in my country also very young, and accumulate a lot of experiences on that. Then the enormous privilege to serve as High Commissioner for Refugees, to be involved in all crises around the world and to learn a lot. And so I accumulated a lot of experiences. I was so lucky to have that, so privileged to have that possibility. It's my duty to put all those capacities at the service of the international community, and no place better than the UN.
What change do you think you are capable to bring to the UN?
Well, this is a question that will take some time to answer. I want a UN to be a UN of all member states. I want a UN to be a UN that is more effective and more cost effective, but more able to deliver to the people we care for all over the world, and a UN that is a platform for dialogue and for understanding and for respect of all cultures, all religions in the world. And I count a lot on China to help in all these objectives.
Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you so much.